What's going on is Anton from AntonDaniels.com. I appreciate you guys for continuing to rock with me. In this video, I want to deep dive into the thoughts of Andrew Yang. Now, Andrew Yang in this whole video is piquing my interest because he was a person that I actually liked during the presidential campaign last year. Never really thought that he was going to win once the numbers started coming out. I had pledged my financial support behind Andrew Yang. And it wasn't because of his mindset towards $1,000 per person. Basically, he was the pioneer from a presidential perspective of UBI, right, Universal Basic Income. And that was a thing that caught my attention, in which I disagreed with Andrew Yang, right? But then he started speaking a little bit more, and I started to deep dive into the policies on his website, which gave me more information and more insight into how he thought and where he looked at things from a business perspective, how he had seen that things need to be managed as far as technology coming in the future. And then again, we all know that UBI was the big talking point that got everybody's attention from Andrew Yang. I actually met him. I stomped for him. I did a video for him on my own channel, on my other channel, Anton Daniels channel. And again, this was in the middle of the primaries in the very beginning of the last presidential election, right? So again, my thoughts on Andrew Yang was based off of other policies and his understanding and ability to be able to talk to other legislators so that things could get done versus things being absolutely deadlocked based off of party lines, right? In addition to that, I never believed that UBI would ever be a thing in the first place, so it was something that I didn't worry about. Fast forward to 2022 now, I see that this is very much a thing that's on the horizon. So I was definitely wrong about Andrew Yang, and then I wound up voting Republican in an election, which I lost that too. Neither here nor there, right? But Andrew Yang is making his rounds again, and it's based off of interviews or an interview that he did with Yahoo Finance, right? And he said that he thinks a recession is inevitable at this point, but doesn't think the stimulus checks spurred inflation. Interesting. So I want to go ahead and start playing this video, and so we can deep dive into what his thoughts are.
Let me ask you some questions about the economy, Andrew. Some people think we're on the verge of a recession or already in a recession. Do you agree? And how would the Forward Party approach the economy and inflation differently from Democrats or Republicans?
We're in a really tough spot economically. You can put me in the camp that thinks that a recession will happen sometime in the next 6 quarters, certainly. And I hope that the recession is relatively mild. There are forces that are cutting in both directions. But the single biggest thing that's pressing on American consumers is inflation. It's going from, frankly, industry to industry. And many companies are finding that they can actually raise prices and still do a robust business, in some cases make more money. So that there are going to be, in my mind, a lot of sources of persistence.
The thing about competition is that when you have it abroad, then that means that you have to continue to keep that contained in order to be able to compete. So I'll give you an example, right? If this place is selling their wings at this price, but then I'm selling mine for a little bit cheaper, obviously competition is good. Similar to healthcare, one of the reasons why, or one of the things that they sold y'all on Obamacare was more competition would create less price pressure, and that would be passed on to the consumer. I don't see that happening, right? Companies are raising prices not just because they can be more profitable, but because their costs are going up. So it's not that companies are raising prices simply because they think that it's best for their bottom line. They're raising prices because it's costing them more to do business as a result of the inflationary pressure that comes along with A, having to compete for less workers, 2 jobs for every maybe 1 American. B, everybody wants more money. C, you also have logistics issues. You had this pre-planned pandemic, in my opinion, that kind of put everything, it took everybody out of work. It started giving everybody stimulus checks. I was just having a conversation with somebody about how, they were breaking down the whole idea of rent checks and things like that, and that's still a form of stimulus. You got them basically printing money. Rent is going up. The Fed kept money too cheap for too long, and then everybody refinanced in addition to the rent moratorium. So there's so many different things that fed into the idea of inflation, but it wasn't just companies raising prices so that they can improve their bottom line. Absolutely not. 100% wrong on that.
For inflation, which is going to lead to the Fed needing to raise interest rates more and more. I sat down for interviews with both David Rubenstein and Ray Dalio recently, both of whom have highly relevant perspectives. And David Rubenstein talked about how in the 70s, Paul Volcker raised interest rates to a point where unemployment was in the double digits, and there was a lot of economic pain. And David Rubenstein suggested that this situation is worse than that situation because our public indebtedness levels are much higher.
Yep.
And we've had low interest rates for so long that we've kind of maxed out our use of certain tools. So I think it's a very, very difficult spot. I hope we can avoid the worst of it, but I certainly think a recession is inevitable at this point.
Think about what he said. He's saying that it's worse today than it is yesteryear. And they had to raise rates so high in yesteryear to where there was a lot of economic pain as far as unemployment and things like that. Whereas now, we have a lot of national debt, and we have a lot of debt across the board just from a consumer perspective, right? And so I think that that's going to affect people, and they're going to be impacted much worse. When we talk about a recession is inevitable, nobody is playing games. We're telling you the truth. And if you cannot see that they have to continue to raise rates in order to fight inflation, I think I was just reading an article on Turkey, and that inflation is somewhere around 80% to where things are practically double now. When you have runaway inflation, it is possibly one of the worst things that can happen for the economy. And so what the Fed is doing is that they're raising rates in order to fight inflation, understanding that there's going to be some economic pain that comes along with it. But they have to do it because they can't avoid having to raise rates in order to have to fight inflation. You can't avoid it. You have to get it in order, or you can actually, kill your economy. So let me go back into this video really quickly.
What about universal basic income? I mean, that's become one of your trademarks. I get that you don't think the stimulus checks contributed to inflation, something you've noted, but many people believe that it does.
It does.
Does that make UBI harder in this environment now that everyone's second guessing all the stimulus checks from the pandemic?
Well, and this is a source of frustration for me, Andy, because if you do the math,
because it's what you ran on.
The stimulus checks were a very, very small component of the trillions of dollars that we pumped into the economy. Most of that money, went into the financial system or the banks, or in some cases, large corporates. So it saddens me that people are blaming checks that were either spent or saved, months and months ago for some of the things that we're experiencing now. And the other aspect of this that makes me upset and agitated is that the enhanced child tax credit, which lifted millions of American children out of poverty, all of the data on that showed that the money was being spent on food and school supplies and fuel, and 140 economists plus, including Nobel Prize winners, said, hey, if there's anything we should do, it's continue the enhanced child tax credit.
The thing that he's not acknowledging, which I know that he's smart enough to recognize, is that not only did the stimulus checks, I can't believe we're even having this conversation. The stimulus checks, it wasn't just, which it did contribute to, it wasn't just the idea of it pumping money into a manufactured economy based off of this whole pandemic thing, right? But what it did was it made people feel comfortable. It had people sitting on the sidelines. And I remember personally scrolling through Facebook and seeing people saying that I'd rather be on unemployment than going into work every day. I'd rather be on unemployment than going into work. Created a worker shortage. People became less productive. Also, combined with the pandemic, it killed a lot of areas and small businesses in which People refused to go to work, and then it created this environment where it was hybrid work from home forever because nobody wanted to go back into work, whether or not they were scared from the virus or they had just gotten so comfortable and that just became the new norm. And it killed economies, it killed small business, it drove up inflation, and there are so many trickle down effects that happen as a result of the STEMI check. So just to summarize it and say, hey, I'm saddened because this is how much they sent out, it's disingenuous. It's a disingenuous argument, 100%.
And of course, American politics being what they are, we discontinued it at the beginning of this year.
This is frozen.
Let me ask you some questions about. Let me ask you some questions.
Let's go.
Let me ask you some.
Let me see.
On food and school
supplies
supplies and fuel, and 140 economists plus, including Nobel Prize winners, said, hey, if there's anything we should do, it's continue the enhanced child tax credit. And of course, American politics being what they are, we discontinued it at the beginning of this year. And so we have to keep our eye on the ball. I mean, when something works, we should be doubling down on it, and not falling for these overly simplistic attributions, particularly at a point when we did pump $4-5 trillion into the economy, and 84% of that plus went into the financial system, large banks, to some extent, state and local governments. I mean, I'm not against all of the things that happened.
We made
a series of choices, and we certainly prioritize institutions well above individuals and families.
That's not true. That's not true. You can never say somebody prioritize institutions over families, when literally the whole reason that they did it is to keep people working, to keep the economy humming, and they made money cheap, which everybody refinanced, so on and so forth. But the problem with Andrew Yang is that, and again, this is no different than any other politician, is that he doubled down on the wrong thing. I think he's doubling down on the wrong thing. I think he's wrong when it comes to, and he even admitted, without admitting, that he would have done the same thing and would have pumped $4 to $5 trillion into the economy, and that everybody was out here buying Balenciagas and getting PPP loans, and that could have been managed much better, but neither here nor there. But let me know what you guys think about this whole interview with regard to Andrew Yang, what his thoughts are, what it is that he's saying about the economy, if you would have approached it the same way. Do you think that he's fit to be president? I'm not so sure anymore personally, because I don't think that he's willing to make the tough choices in order to ensure that the future for our kids are truly good. Is truly good. But again, I want to know what y'all thoughts are in the comments. Let me know what y'all thinking. Make sure you subscribe to the Patreon. Link is in the description as well as pinned to the top of the chat. We doing some phenomenal things in the Patreon that allows for us to continue to teach people how to look at things from a business perspective, including building a business, which is one of the reasons why I'm here in Miami right now. But again, let me know what your thoughts are. Andrew Yang saying that stimulus checks did not necessarily spur inflation to the state that it is, or to the how it is now and how people are being affected, in which the Fed has to raise rates in order to fight it. But let me know what y'all thoughts are. If you need to kick it with me personally, email me at antondaniels413@gmail.com, and we gonna get you scheduled. I love you. I appreciate you. I'm gonna holler at you later. Peace.